You know what they don't tell you about hitting the jackpot? Sometimes, the house always wins. And you don't even realize you were the one being played until all the chips are gone. I'm Chloe. I'm 32 years old, and for a while there, I was the woman who had everything. I mean, everything. The kind of life you see airbrushed in magazines, the kind that makes other women whisper with envy when you walk into a room. My husband, Daniel Harrison, was the architect of that life. Not a literal architect god, no, that's far too creative for him. Daniel was a titan of finance, a man who saw the world in spreadsheets and profit margins. He built our life with the same meticulous, unnerving precision he used to build his clients' fortunes. Our apartment was a glass-walled sanctuary overlooking Central Park. Sunlight would pour in every morning, glinting off the polished marble floors and the minimalist, brutally expensive furniture Daniel had selected. He was a man of taste. Impeccable, predictable taste. Everything was in shades of gray, cream, and charcoal. Even our life felt like that sometimes. Polished, perfect, and utterly sterile. Daniel loved me. I know he did. He loved me in the way he loved a prized acquisition. He took care of me. He provided for me. He showed me off at galas and fundraisers, his beautiful, charming wife on his arm. He never raised his voice. He never forgot an anniversary. He was, by all accounts, the perfect husband. And that was the problem. His love felt like a perfectly balanced portfolio. Low risk, steady returns, utterly devoid of passion. It was a comfortable, cashmere-lined cage. And I, with a soul that craved a little bit of beautiful, chaotic wilderness, was starting to rattle the bars. It started subtly. A lingering look with a handsome waiter. A flirtatious conversation with a stranger at a bar when I was out with friends. Little jolts to the system, reminders that I was more than just Mrs. Harrison, that I was still Chloe. A woman who could still turn a head. A woman who still had a fire inside her that wasn't being stoked. Then, I met Leo. It was at some pop-up gallery in Soho Daniel had dragged me to. A charity event he was sponsoring. The air was thick with the smell of champagne and polite conversation. I was bored to tears, smiling my plastic smile, when I saw it, a painting. A chaotic swirl of deep blues and violent reds, a storm of emotion on canvas. It was the first thing that had made me feel anything all night. "It's called The Beautiful Wreck," a voice said from behind me. I turned. He was leaning against the wall, a smudge of that same blue paint on his jaw. He was all sharp angles and untamed dark hair, a stark contrast to the clean-cut men in suits surrounding us. He held a glass of cheap whiskey, not champagne. "It's intense," I managed. "The best things in life usually are." He smiled, and it was a slow, knowing thing. "I'm Leo. The artist. The wreck, if you will." We talked for an hour. Or rather, he talked, and I listened, captivated. He spoke of art not as an investment, but as a visceral need. He spoke of passion, of breaking rules, of living a life that wasn't color-coded for convenience. He looked at me not as a beautiful accessory, but as a mystery he wanted to unravel. He didn't ask for my number. He just handed me a card with the address of his studio in Bushwick. "Come by sometime," he said, his eyes holding mine. "If you ever get tired of the view from the top." That night, lying in our king-sized bed, the sheets smelling faintly of Daniel's ridiculously expensive lavender-scented detergent, I clutched that card in my hand. It felt like a key, a dangerous, thrilling key to a door I knew I shouldn't open. But oh, how I wanted to. My first visit to Leo's studio was like stepping into another dimension. The air was thick with the scent of turpentine, coffee, and something uniquely him. Canvases were everywhere, leaning against walls stacked in corners. Music I'd never heard before blared from a vintage record player. It was a glorious, vibrant mess. And in the center of it all was Leo, in a paint-splattered t-shirt, looking more alive than anyone I had ever known. "I didn't think you'd come," he said, his smile genuine. "I get tired of the view sometimes," I replied, the words feeling truer than anything I'd said in years. That afternoon, we didn't touch. We just talked. He showed me his work, explaining the fury and the love he poured into each piece. I told him about my life, editing out the specifics, painting myself as a tragic bird in a gilded cage. He listened, truly listened, his dark eyes making me feel seen for the first time in forever. It wasn't cheating. Not yet. It was breathing. But one visit turned into two, then three. The excuses to Daniel became easier, more fluid. A yoga class that ran late, a long lunch with a friend, a charity committee meeting. Daniel, ever trusting, ever absorbed in his world of numbers, never questioned me. The first time Leo kissed me, it was against a half-finished canvas. His hands were rough, his lips tasted of whiskey and rebellion. It wasn't the gentle, practiced kiss of my husband. It was a fire. It was a storm. It was everything I had been missing. Our affair was a secret garden I tended with exhilarating recklessness. With Leo, I wasn't Mrs. Harrison. I was just Chloe. I wore jeans, not designer dresses. We ate pizza out of a box on the floor of his studio, not 5-course meals at Michelin-starred restaurants. We made love with a desperate, frantic energy, as if we were stealing time itself. I convinced myself I had it all under control. I was a master of two worlds. I could have the fiery passion of Leo and the cool security of Daniel. I was smart, I was careful, but the beautiful thing about fire is that it's impossible to fully contain, and eventually, it leaves a trace of smoke. It was a Tuesday. I came home late, smelling faintly of Leo's cologne, a scent of sandalwood and chaos. I had a well-rehearsed story on my lips about a fundraiser meeting that went on forever. I found Daniel in the living room, sitting in his favorite charcoal gray armchair. The lights were low. The city glittered outside the vast windows. He wasn't reading the Wall Street Journal or looking at his tablet. He was just sitting there, waiting. The silence in the room was heavier than anything I had ever felt. "Hi," I said, my voice sounding unnaturally high. "Sorry I'm late, the traffic was..." He didn't look at me, he just gestured to the glass coffee table. Lying on its pristine surface was my silk scarf. The one I thought I'd lost. The one I'd left on the floor of Leo's studio last week. My blood ran cold. My heart hammered against my ribs. He slowly raised his eyes to meet mine. There was no anger in them, no rage, no fire. There was something far, far worse, a complete and utter emptiness. His voice, when he finally spoke, was calm, measured, devoid of all emotion. "Who is he, Chloe?" I had prepared for a storm. I had rehearsed the tears, the apologies, the carefully crafted narrative of loneliness and neglect that would surely melt his heart. I was ready for the screaming, the accusations, the drama. The storm never came. What came instead was a terrifying, profound silence. The next morning, I woke up to the familiar sound of his Nespresso machine. I walked into the kitchen, my stomach in knots, ready for the confrontation. He was standing by the counter, dressed in a perfectly pressed suit, just like any other day. He glanced at me. "Good morning," he said. His tone was polite. Civil. The tone you would use with a colleague or a distant acquaintance. He poured his espresso into a cup, added exactly 1 teaspoon of sugar, and walked into his home office, closing the door softly behind him. And that was it. The punishment had begun. And it wasn't loud and violent, it was quiet. It was methodical. It was the complete erasure of us. He stopped touching me, not even an accidental brush of hands as we passed in the hallway. He slept on the far edge of the bed, a cold, unbridgeable chasm between us. He stopped talking to me about anything that mattered. He would make polite small talk about the weather or ask if I needed anything from the store, but the conversations were hollow shells. The shared jokes, the comfortable silences, the easy intimacy we once had, all gone. Replaced by this suffocating, formal courtesy. Our beautiful apartment, once a symbol of our success, became my prison. The silence echoed off the marble floors. Every tick of the expensive clock on the wall felt like a hammer blow to my sanity. I tried everything to break through it. I screamed. I yelled at him, called him a coward, for not facing me, for not fighting. He just looked at me with those empty eyes and said, "I have nothing to yell about." I cried. I sobbed, performing my practiced vulnerability, telling him how lonely I was, how I'd made a terrible mistake. He simply handed me a box of tissues and said, "I see." I tried to seduce him. I wore the lingerie he'd bought me, tried to initiate the intimacy we once shared. He gently removed my hands, his touch clinical, and said, "I don't think that's a good idea, Chloe." His detachment was a masterpiece of psychological warfare. He wasn't treating me like a wife he was angry with. He was treating me like a stranger, a ghost in our own home. He was still there, a constant, silent presence, but he had already left me in every way that mattered. It was a living wake, and I was mourning a marriage with the man who was still sitting across the dinner table from me, silently eating his perfectly cooked salmon. I'd wanted chaos. I'd wanted passion and drama. I never imagined that the most devastating punishment of all would be nothing. A complete, soul-crushing, silent nothing. Daniel was a man of process. He didn't make emotional decisions. He executed strategic plans. And I soon realized his silence wasn't just a punishment, it was a prelude. It was the quiet before he systematically dismantled our life. It began with the finances. One afternoon, my credit card was declined at Bergdorf's. The humiliation was searing. I called Daniel, my voice trembling with a rage that felt pathetic even to me. "My card didn't work," I said, trying to sound indignant. "That's correct," he replied, his voice calm, as if discussing a minor stock fluctuation. "I've closed our joint accounts. I've opened a new one for you. There's enough in it for your weekly expenses, groceries, necessities. You'll find the debit card on your nightstand." Groceries, necessities. He had reduced my life to a line-item budget. The power I once wielded, the effortless luxury I took for granted, was gone. Snatched away without a single raised voice. Then came the subtle restructuring of our home. I noticed him spending hours in his office, the door closed. One evening, I saw a folder on his desk, the tab neatly labeled, Harrison v. Harrison. He was meeting with lawyers. He was preparing. He started separating his belongings with quiet efficiency. His books were moved to different shelves. His clothes were consolidated to one side of the vast walk-in closet, leaving my side looking like a garish, overstuffed shrine to a life that was already over. He wasn't packing to leave. He was drawing a line, cordoning off his world from mine, right inside our home. Desperate, I ran to Leo. I needed the fire, the chaos, the validation, but the thrill of our secret garden had withered under the harsh glare of my reality. "He's not even yelling at me, Leo," I cried, huddled in his messy studio. "He's just erasing me." Leo tried to be comforting. He held me, whispered passionate words about us against the world, but his world of artistic freedom and living in the moment couldn't fix my problems. He couldn't restore my Amex. He couldn't fight the silent war Daniel was waging. My desperation began to feel like a heavy weight in his bohemian paradise, and the vibrant connection we had started to feel strained, tainted by the very real, very ugly consequences of my actions. I was losing everything. Not in a dramatic explosion, but in a slow, controlled demolition. My friends, who were really our friends, started to become distant. They could feel the Arctic chill emanating from Daniel, and no one wanted to get caught in the frost. The invitations stopped coming. The phone calls trickled to a halt. My gilded cage was being taken apart, bar by silent bar. And I was discovering, to my horror, that I had absolutely no idea how to fly. After 4 weeks, 28 days of crushing, suffocating silence, he finally broke it. He asked me to meet him in the living room after he got home from work. It felt like being summoned to the principal's office. I found him standing by the window, looking out at the city. He was holding 2 glasses of whiskey. He handed one to me. It felt less like a peace offering and more like a final formality. "Sit down, Chloe," he said. His voice was no longer empty. It was neutral. The voice he used for business. He didn't sit on the sofa with me. He remained standing, a commanding presence against the glittering skyline. He didn't pace. He didn't fidget. He just stood there, in complete control. "I have filed for divorce," he stated. It wasn't an accusation. It wasn't a question. It was a fact, like stating the current market index. "The papers will be served to you tomorrow. Everything is in order. Our prenuptial agreement is quite clear. You will be well provided for, according to the terms we both signed." I vaguely remembered signing something years ago, a formality his lawyers had insisted on. I'd been too busy planning our wedding in Tuscany to read the fine print. "Daniel, please," I started, the whiskey glass trembling in my hand. "We can fix this. I made a mistake. A horrible, stupid mistake. I love you." He let out a short, dry sound that wasn't quite a laugh. It was devoid of all humor. "Love," he repeated, as if tasting a foreign word. "This isn't about love, Chloe. This is about trust." My world, my entire profession, is built on quantifiable risk and trust. You presented yourself as a stable asset. You turned out to be a volatile one. He took a sip of his whiskey. I'm not angry. Anger is an emotion, and emotions are a poor basis for decision-making. I am disappointed, and I am correcting a poor investment. The sheer, cold-blooded cruelty of his words stole my breath. He wasn't talking about our marriage, he was talking about a failed merger. So that's it? I whispered, tears finally streaming down my face. 9 years. You're just liquidating us? He walked over to his desk and picked up a small, innocuous-looking envelope. He slid a photograph from it and placed it on the coffee table in front of me. It was of me and Leo. We were laughing, walking out of a small, discreet restaurant in the West Village. I was looking up at him with an expression of pure adoration. The photo was dated 6 months ago. My blood turned to ice. He had known. For 6 months. He had known long before the scarf, long before his confrontation. You think I didn't know? He said, his voice dropping to a low, chilling register. Chloe, I notice everything. A change in your scent, a new app on your phone, a discrepancy in your timeline of an afternoon. I manage a $10 billion fund. Do you honestly believe I couldn't manage the assets under my own roof? The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. The last 6 months, the time I thought I was so clever, so in control, so alive, I had been a fool. I hadn't been playing him. I had been a line item in his long-term exit strategy. His silence wasn't a reaction to his discovery. It was the final phase of his meticulously executed plan. He had waited, gathered his information, arranged his finances, consulted his lawyers, and only when every piece was in place did he choose to act. He looked at me then, and for the first time in a month, I saw an emotion in his eyes. It wasn't love. It wasn't hate. It was the cold, distant pity one might feel for a creature one is about to put out of its misery. You wanted drama, he said, his voice flat. The problem is, you brought a knife to a boardroom negotiation. You were never even in the game. It has been 8 months now. 8 months since Daniel Harrison methodically and completely excised me from his life. I live in a 1-bedroom apartment in Queens. The view from my window is a brick wall. The sounds are of sirens and neighbors arguing. It's a world away from the silent, sun-drenched penthouse overlooking the park. I work now as a receptionist at a dental clinic. The pay is barely enough to cover rent and my cheap wine habit. I tried to make it work with Leo. I really did. But the fantasy couldn't survive the harsh reality. The passionate artist who seemed so romantic when I was a wealthy, bored wife became just a man in a messy apartment when I was a broke, desperate divorcee. The chaos I once found so thrilling just felt tiring, unstable. We lasted 2 months before it imploded in a mess of broke artist cliches and my own simmering resentment. The truest, most bitter part of my punishment is Daniel's complete and utter indifference. His life, from what I can gather through the curated social media of our former friends, has continued its upward trajectory. He hasn't replaced me. There are no pictures of him with a new, younger woman on his arm. His posts are about closing a massive deal, a solo hiking trip in Patagonia, a new wing he funded at the museum. He looks content, peaceful, as if I were a fever that has finally broken. He didn't destroy my life out of rage. He simply moved on. He identified a problem me and eliminated it with cold corporate efficiency. My dramatic emotional affair was nothing more than a bad investment he had to write off. Sometimes, late at night, I sit by my window, swirling cheap Cabernet in a coffee mug, and I tell myself a different story. I tell myself that his silence was proof of how much I hurt him, that his coldness was a shield to protect a broken heart, that a man who truly didn't care would have screamed, would have fought, would have shown some flicker of the passion we once had. But I know the truth. He never fought because I was never worth the fight. The life he built wasn't for us. It was for him. And I was merely its most beautiful decoration, and when the decoration became cracked, he simply threw it away and redecorated. He won. The house always wins. And I am left here, in this small, quiet room, surrounded by the deafening echoes of the silence he left behind. The most brutal punishment of all wasn't losing the money or the status. It was the soul-crushing realization that in the end, to the man I had given 9 years of my life, I hadn't mattered enough to even be angry at. I was just a number on a balance sheet that no longer added up.